Hi guys, welcome back to Flower Class with Helen and Olivia. My name is Madison and I'm going to be teaching today's workshop, which is spring lights. So we're going to play with a neutral color palette today, keeping things pretty monochromatic. We are going to have some white elements, some green elements, and then some bicolored elements. So some that are either have variegation or are a fusion of white and green. So I really love teaching neutral classes. It kind of works for every single season. So you can do it spring, summer, fall, winter, etc. But my favorites are kind of like a winter whites and then spring whites. And then obviously you kind of just manipulate the elements for each class. So today you're going to see some flowers that are a little bit softer, daintier, and are going to be seasonal to the spring. All right, so before we go ahead and get started, I'm just going to explain to you guys what tools I'm using in class today. So I'm going to be toggling back and forth between using a knife and then also a pair of clippers. So either one is great. My suggestion is if you're kind of in your first design days, go ahead and start with a pair of clippers. And then as you start to get a little bit more comfortable, you can transition to knife, which I find to be a little bit quicker and kind of easier to handle. So I'm going to use both so you guys can, just for demonstration purposes, but either of those tools would be wonderful. We also are going to be using a length of chicken wire. I actually already cut mine in half, but we're going to cut our chicken wire in half. So if you would prefer to use wire cutters for that, I would go ahead and just grab some wire cutters now. Those will be helpful to have. And then we provided just like a simple clear glass vase. You're going to want to go ahead and fill it to about 1.5 inches below the water line or below the baseline. And that will be plenty of water to keep your flowers drinking for the next couple of days. And then at the end of class, I'll show you guys how to add water to your arrangement to make sure that it's looking happy and healthy for quite some time. All right, so step one, we are going to go ahead and remove this shiny leaf out of our bucket. This is called a tea leaf. Quite large, shiny in texture, which means that we can submerge it and it's not going to start to decompose. So that's great for us. We're going to use this to kind of rim our vase and cover the mechanics of the arrangement. So I'm going to begin by taking my clippers, whatever tool you're using, and I'm going to clip off about 4 to 5 inches of this stem, or I'm going to cut off the stem as well as about 4 to 5 inches of the leaf itself. Just cutting that guy right off. And then I'm going to take the less shiny side. So you'll see that one side of your leaf is going to have kind of a spine down the back of it, and it's a little bit less shiny. And I'm going to take that side down, and I'm just going to kind of run it along the edge of whatever surface you're using. So today I'm working on a table, but kitchen island, whatever you might be. And you'll start to hear kind of like a softening of the fibers in the stem. So, and what I did by rubbing it kind of on the edge of my table, I broke down some of those really fibrous bits of stem so that it's easier to manipulate. So I'm going to now go ahead and take my leaf, roll it into like a burrito shape, like so, and then just kind of slide it right into my vase. And then I'll usually kind of pull the edges out so that the leaf kind of fills the vase out nicely. All right, so next, either using clippers or scissors, I'm going to just go ahead and cut off any leaf that is above the edge of the vase. So you don't need to be super neat with this. It can be kind of sloppy. None of this is going to be viewable once the actual flowers are in the vase. So I'm just kind of trying to get it cleaned up and ready to go ahead and add floral. So looking like this. And now we're going to, I mentioned I already cut mine in half, but about half of this piece of chicken wire is plenty for this size vase. So chicken wire is an excellent tool to have handy when you're designing. It's going to help to create some structure in your vase and allow you to be really intentional as you're designing. So it's going to support your stems. It's going to keep them from moving or shifting in the vase. And once you add things in, as you start to add more and more elements, things are going to stay put rather than kind of falling over on each other. So using half of my piece of chicken wire, I'm going to begin by just folding top to bottom, and then I'm going to fold my two sides in. So nothing fancy about what I just did. I'm just trying to get it to be like a better size that I can then go ahead and slide it right into my vase. All right, so if we look at our vase from above, you can see that we created lots of little nooks and crannies that we can then go ahead and slide our stems into. You don't need to concentrate on this grid at all. So don't feel like you need to focus on getting like certain stems into certain holes. This is going to, excuse me, do its job entirely on its own. So you can really just ignore that it's in the vase altogether, and just approach it with stems as though it's an empty vase. All right, so lots of really fun stuff in this bucket today. I'm going to begin by just kind of laying out some of my mini green hydrangea to kind of break up my space a little bit and create like a nice little bed of floral. So your mini green hydrangea are going to look like this. You should have 4 of them in your bucket. And we'll begin by just pulling all 4 out and removing this little protective sleeve on the flower. And I remove it by just pulling down. That way you can avoid ripping or breaking your flower stem. So mini green hydrangea is just essentially a premature version of a full-size hydrangea. So the farmers cut it early because it has this really lovely compact shape. Tends to have a really long base life when the buds are so tight. I'm so sorry. And it's also a really beautiful green color. So I actually love hydrangea leaves. I think they're so pretty in contrast with the kind of face of the flower. They do a beautiful job kind of creating some depth by spiking out beyond the face of the flower. So whenever possible, I will generally leave my hydrangea stems on so long as they enhance the beauty of the flower. So anything that's kind of fanning around or framing the face of the flower, I will leave on. Anything else below that, I'm just going to go ahead and remove. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that test for all of my stems, seeing if it frames the face of your flower. If so, you can keep them on, and then anything else, we're going to remove them because it's going to get kind of hard to get into the actual arrangement. All right, so we have 4 of our mini green hydrangea, and I'm going to do 1, 2, 3 around the outside of my vase, and then 1 a little bit higher up. So I will demonstrate how we're going to determine how long to keep our stems. And this technique I will show for the first couple of flowers, but I'm going to kind of use this all throughout class. So demonstrate it in the beginning, and then you'll see I'm kind of just doing it as I go, this same technique all throughout. So I'm going to start by kind of positioning the flower where I might like it to be in my design. So in this case, I want this green head of the flower to kind of rest right on the edge of my vase here, like so. I don't want it to be super far out like this where I'm seeing tons of exposed stem. Even something like this is way too long. In order to make sure that this arrangement is scaled appropriately to my vase, I really do want to keep these first initial flowers kind of nice and snug in. And then our bulk will come as we start to add more of our white and bicolored elements. Okay, so I'm going to hold my stem up like so, just kind of resting that green, bright green face of the flower on the edge of my vase. And then I'm going to use my clippers and I'm going to cut it, cut my stem where it looks like it's going to kind of hit the side of the vase, like so. And then I'm going to go in at an angle. So for these first couple stems, it really doesn't matter where you place them. I just kind of want them to be equally spaced around the outside. So just 3 kind of equally spaced blooms around the outside of my vase. So this next stem, holding it up in the same way as before, giving that stem a nice cut. And then I'm going to go in opposite that first guy. Okay, and then my last hydrangea, I'm going to focus on getting kind of in this back area over here. So it's using the same technique to cut my stems, and then I will pop this last hydrangea in right there. Okay, so we've got 3 nicely spaced, beautiful hydrangea blooms down low. I'm now going to get one a little bit higher in my arrangement. So we are going to use our thumb and pinky finger to measure the height of our vase. So just taking my thumb and pinky finger here, measuring my vase. And I've got that measurement, and that is going to be about how tall I want the floral portion of my arrangement to be. So I can use that measurement, kind of measuring it up here, and then we'll see that I kind of want the peak of my arrangement to exist right about here. And that is going to make sure that it is scaled appropriately to your base, so we don't have a massive arrangement that's overwhelming our base, or a teeny tiny arrangement where it feels miniature inside of the base and the base is just totally overwhelming it. All right, so in this case, I'm going to just kind of hold my last hydrangea stem up to that height, and then I'm going to clip my stem where it looks like it's going to hit a little bit above the table. So about like this, and then I'll usually just give it an extra inch or so of snip. And then I'm going to go in up top in my arrangement. So you'll notice I'm not going straight up and down like a flagpole in the center. I'm orienting it off to one side, and it really doesn't matter what side that is right now. So you can see this, guys. I can measure again and just make sure that I did a good job there, but generally that height is going to be where I'm aiming to keep the majority of my blooms, although there are going to be some things that kind of like drift and flow outside that, but generally that's going to be like a nice footprint for my design. All right, so next up I think I'm going to go for my roses. So we are going to have 7 roses. Today we're using one of my favorite varieties of whites called a Playa Blanca. So I like this variety. It has a beautiful shape to it. Doesn't have that like bullet shape that are true of many white varieties, or it doesn't also look like we've just kind of smushed the top of it down, which can be how some of the whites look as well. So these tend to be really pristine and beautiful. It's a great white that I think can read like a true bright white, or can read more of like a creamy ivory color as well. So I think depending on what you pair it with, you can read so many different ways, which is why I love it. It's very versatile as far as whites go. Often you'll have like bright white that looks almost very severe next to some softer colors, but this guy really looks great kind of along the full spectrum of neutral tones. So love that. All right, so we are going to begin step 1 by removing all of the leaves on our stems. So we're lucky this guy doesn't have any thorns, so you can kind of just run your hand along the length of your stem, just removing any leaves along the way down. So we're going to remove all of the leaves with the exception of these little kind of, it almost looks like a little collar around the top of the rose. It's underneath the base of the rose is where it's connected. Those guys are offering support to the flower. They're actually protecting the area where the petal is kind of connecting with the stem. So if we remove those, it'll just kind of make that area a little bit more vulnerable, and oftentimes you'll find that the petals just kind of like fall away really easily once it doesn't have that protective collar. So we're removing all of the leaves except for that little support collar underneath the base of the flower. Everything else you can just pull right off or strip away. Okay, so step 2 is we're going to remove our guard petals. So I said these guys are pretty pristine as far as roses go. You'll notice that if you look at it from head on, very little bruising, which is wonderful, very little tears, which is kind of unheard of. So these guys are really great. They are going to have a few petals around the outside of the flower that aren't necessarily as perfect as the rest. Those are your guard petals. So when the bud is, or when the rose is just a tiny little bud on the plant, these petals are the ones that are protecting it, shielding it from things like rain, wind, hands as it's being harvested, all kinds of different stuff. So we leave them on until the minute we're about to put them into the arrangement because they continue to protect the flower. So it totally depends on the flower, but it's usually about 3 to 4 petals around the outside of the flower that just look a little bit less perfect than the rest. So you can go through and just kind of pluck away anything that isn't as perfect. And again, some of yours may have 1 guard petal, some may have as many as like 6 to 7 guard petals. So anything that looks imperfect or is distracting, and with white varieties, I will tend to pull more petals rather than less, because it's just more obvious when on a true white, if you see kind of any bruising or tears in the flower, it's just more stark on a white flower. All right, so we've got all 7 roses cleaned and prepped and ready to go ahead and put into our arrangement. I'm now going to break my roses off into groupings. I'm going to do a few groupings in this design just to make sure that this really bright white color is kind of spread throughout. So my first grouping, I'm going to do a grouping of 3, and then I'm going to do 2 groupings of 2. All right, so revisiting my design, whatever side your high mini green hydrangea is, you're going to have kind of a high pocket of roses on the other side. So my high mini green hydrangea is on this side, so I'm going to do a kind of pocket of roses to kind of fill out this open cavity opposite that mini green hydrangea. So we'll take our first rose, and I'm going to kind of line it up maybe just a little bit farther. I don't want it to look like super orby or very rounded, so maybe it's just a little bit farther beyond your mini green hydrangea, but getting that general height there. And then we're going to get our first stem kind of in up top. Again, avoiding going straight up and down like a bullet in the center. We're going to go in at a bit of an angle, like so. So I've got one guy in. I'm going to do number 2 a little bit below that. So just kind of aiming, and again, you can hold your rose up in the same way that we've been doing this entire time. Just holding it up where you might like it to be in your design, giving that a nice cut, and then you can nestle the second rose in alongside the first. So these 2 are together, and then I'm going to put my last one in kind of that alongside that grouping. It's almost going to create like a little triangular shape, but I am going to make sure that when I get my roses in, that I pull one of my roses a little bit farther out of the design, just to make sure that it doesn't look super perfect. So any shapes that your brain can recognize, it's going to kind of draw your eye right towards that shape. So you can see I left this last rose a little bit farther out. Move forward a little bit. You can see me a little bit better. So yes, your brain is going to kind of hone in on shapes that it can recognize. So if it sees this as a triangle, it's going to kind of draw your eye right there rather than allowing you to take the arrangement in kind of as a collective whole. So I've got my high pocket on this side. If I turn this arrangement around, I'm going to kind of do another pocket here and another pocket over here. So for my next grouping of roses, I'm going to aim to have it about halfway down. So holding my rose right about halfway down, giving it a nice cut, and then we can slide this guy in on this side. See, he's about halfway down, and then my next one is going to go down pretty far, kind of right near the baseline, almost like how we place this initial hydrangea. So get that guy in there, and then as we rotate once more, you'll see there's kind of like a big area of green over here. So we're going to do another pocket of roses in that gap right there. So first rose in this pocket is going to be about halfway down. All right, just a smidge too long. Like so. And then our next one's going to be kind of right on the baseline, just like that second rose in the previous pair. Okay, so looking good. Basically what I was trying to do is just trying to kind of spread the color throughout. So I want this kind of bright white color to be represented on all sides of the design. I also want it to be represented at different heights, which is why I did kind of a high pocket and then counter that with lower pockets. So if someone is standing next to my arrangement, it's still gonna look just as beautiful to someone standing as it's going to look to someone who's maybe sitting next to my arrangement. So that was my reasoning for choosing the positions that I did for these groupings. All right, so next up I'm gonna kind of just add a little bit of texture with this umbrella fern. So you can do this in a number of different ways. I think it would look really beautiful to split your stem. So you could kind of just find wherever there is a logical kind of split in your umbrella fern, you can kind of just break off that bottom piece. And then maybe you want to have some spraying out down low and then the second piece kind of spraying out high. I also think you could kind of just tuck it into the top of your arrangement and have it be more of like an asymmetrical spray coming up on this side, which is what I think I'm gonna do. If the umbrella fern is really big and branchy, so they can be like as big as this big, then I'll kind of lean more towards breaking it up. But this guy's kind of nice and petite, and I think we can get away with leaving him all as one piece without it overwhelming our actual arrangement. So I have my high pocket of roses on this side, and I'm just gonna kind of have a little spray of this green kind of behind that pocket. So I'm gonna snip my stem, holding this guy up. I do want him to kind of extend beyond the rest of the flowers. I want him to kind of spray out. So when I snipped, was envisioning it that it would be kind of spraying out beyond the other flowers. So for this umbrella fern, you can just kind of tuck him in. And at first he's gonna look a little bit aggressive, but as soon as you tuck him in nicely, it'll start to kind of compress him a little bit. And then he's just like a beautiful spray. It's gonna give you some texture. I love the bounce that it has. So I'm super fond of umbrella fern. I mean, even just give it just the slightest little snip there. Okay, perfect. So has some beautiful bounce to it, which we love. Great texture, and blends really beautifully with our other greens. Okay, so next up, I'm thinking we're gonna go for our tulips. They have a really soft gummy stem, so I wanna make sure that I'm putting them in earlier before things get too tight in my design. So we are going to have, I believe, is it 3 of these guys? We're going to have, so you're gonna have a couple parrot tulips, and you're also gonna have a couple of regular tulips. So your parrot tulips are the ones that are more of like a hybrid green-white. So they have a really frilly texture to them. They look very different than a traditional tulip. So they're a lot more premium, and they just are a lot more unique looking. This variety of tulip is so pretty. It has like, it's almost like star-shaped when it's starting to open. So this is our traditional tulip. And it looks like you're gonna have 2 of each, although I got another tulip snuck into mine, another parrot tulip. So if you have a third, just go ahead and choose a beautiful place for it. I think I'm gonna do, I'm gonna see, I kind of like the idea of maybe doing one of each tulip alongside the other, so you can really get the contrast there. So at this point, I'm just going to choose 2 places where maybe there's a lot of a bit large concentration of green, or where maybe you have gapping in your design. So in this case, I have a big hole that's kind of created itself over here. So if I pop my first tulips in on this side, I'm going to want to make sure that my second grouping of 2 tulips is going to go a little bit lower and kind of on a different side. So let's start with that first grouping. You can remove your leaves on the tulip stems. I usually will leave like maybe 1 tulip leaf on. I think it's pretty. And then we can kind of just hold our tulip up in that little hole right there. And this hole may not be obvious on your design. It may be somewhere else entirely. So my suggestion is just like find somewhere where there is a hole, and then we're gonna pop our first 2 tulips. So I'm gonna get this guy in here, and then my next one in a little bit below that. So for our second tulip, just kind of nestling him in alongside the first. And I like the idea that that they look very different, but they're in kind of like the same color family and still have that same kind of waxy texture to them. So I've got this grouping up here. So in order to counter that, I'm gonna get another grouping over somewhere on the opposite side in the back. So my first one, whereas I started with that traditional tulip on this one, maybe this time I will start with my parrot tulip as my top bloom. And I'm just gonna kind of get my second 2 tulips worked into the back here a little bit lower. Okay. And I suspect that many of us might have gotten a third tulip. So if you did a third parrot tulip, just go ahead and pop it in somewhere else where you don't already have any tulips, so that we can kind of spread the love a little bit. So I've got one up top over here. I did another grouping in the back a little bit lower, and then I popped my last one in over here just to brighten up this side of the design a little bit. Okay, next up we are going to go for our viburnum. So your viburnum is a very unique bloom, has these beautiful like orbs of green, nice, lovely bounce that I mentioned I'm really fond of before, pretty little leaves, and this is kind of the quintessential spring flower, and it's this really lovely kind of softer green color. So you do have two of these guys, and I like to let them sit a little bit farther out of the design so that you can still see that pretty bounce it has. You can still see kind of the pattern in which the flower grows. If I put it in really tight and choke it up, it just looks like a mini green. So I want to make sure that when I'm adding these guys in, that I let them kind of drift outside of my design a little bit. So I'm going to do kind of one up on this side. So I have this big spray of my umbrella fern on this side, and I'm going to counter that by having kind of my first piece of viburnum on the opposite side. So holding my stem up where it's still going to sit outside of my blooms, or the rest of my blooms, and then I'm going to slide this first guy in on this side, resisting the urge to kind of tuck it in too much where maybe you've lost, or maybe you would lose the actual kind of beautiful characteristics of the flower. So we've got this guy on this side, and then my second piece, I'm going to, so we went high on this side, so I'm going to do low on this side. So for my second piece of viburnum, I'm going to kind of have it coming out of the side of my arrangement over here. And again, this is really, we still have that pretty little bounce. So I've left it farther out rather than tucking it in and making it just kind of blend into all the rest of our flowers. All right. So next up, I'm going to play with my Veronica, or this Lysimachia. Veronica. Okay, so Lysimachia and Veronica look very, very similar. Super, super fun flower. It's a line flower, so if I hold it upright, it's going to keep that upright positioning rather than kind of falling or drooping on itself. So we're going to begin by just removing any of the leaves. You may have some cute little like buds or smaller underdeveloped Veronica that are underneath the large Veronica. And if you do have those, I like to leave them on. I think they're pretty. So a couple different, we have two of them in a couple different patterns that you could kind of choose to. Usually when I have a line flower like this, I will usually kind of do two together on one side of my design, which I think would be so pretty. I also think that you could do kind of opposing Veronica, but I think in this case, I'm just going to kind of like do both of mine together on this side and have them kind of fanning over the side of my design. So with your first Veronica, again, this is going to be one of those flowers that kind of drifts out beyond the rest of your flowers. So you don't need to be super crazy about trying to make sure that it's not too much taller than the rest of your flowers. So we kind of just want it to kind of look like it's creeping out the top of our design, not going in a straight up and down, but going in a bit of an angle. And you can see they have this like really pretty kind of creeping pattern to its growth. So I think that looks so pretty like that. And then my second one, you can kind of have it working out on this side, and I'm just going to turn so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to get my second one in, and then I'll show you guys where I put it. So when I'm designing towards the camera, I'll often get to the last step and I have no idea what my design looks like. So I did my first Veronica kind of up here, and then my second Veronica a little bit lower, but kind of creeping out in the same pattern so that it looks like it's kind of fanning out of one side of my design. Okay, next up, let's go for our Hyacinth. I want to make sure that these guys have a really substantial stem, so they may be more submerged in your bucket. You're going to have two of them, so just peep around in there. These guys will just remove all of their leaves. So they look green right now, but they're going to start to bloom out into this beautiful star-shaped white flower. And they do have a really thick gummy stem like a tulip, so important to get them in not necessarily last when you might be forcing it in or risk breakage. So we have two of them, And I'm going to do one kind of up top on this side of my design over here, and then I'll do another one a little bit lower to counter that. So my first one, I'm going to kind of work into the back of my design, and I mentioned I'm going a little bit, you are not going to be able to see it really clearly right now, but once it starts to bloom out, it will have more of a presence. So I went high in the back of my design, and I'm going to counter that by going lower in the front of my design. So again, turning just so I can see what I'm doing here. And this guy will also have more of a presence once he starts to bloom out, but for the time being, they're just going to kind of blend in nicely with our other green flowers. Okay. So next I'm going to do, you should have one hosta leaf. So I'm going to pull that guy out right now. So hostas is really beautiful. Likely seeing it kind of like popping up in people's gardens right now. So this guy loves shade. So he can do great kind of like on the side of your house or anywhere that's not getting a lot of direct sunlight. This is a perfect option for those areas in your garden. And they tend to look like pretty all throughout summer, can tolerate a little bit more of warmer weather. So love the hosta leaf in both cut designs. Also just like at the live plant is so pretty as well. And there's lots of different varieties, most of which have this, like they almost look like they're watercolor painted in our design. So I have a lot of density on this side of my design because these viburnum are kind of worked up over here. So I'm going to give this other side of my design a little bit more oomph by putting my larger leaf kind of back here. So you can cut your stem, and then my suggestion would be to kind of work this into the top of your design. Again, it's oriented off to one side rather than being straight up and down in the center. And that's just going to give you a little bit more density on this side of the design and create a little bit more balance. Okay, awesome. Next, I'm going to go for my hellebore. So similarly to viburnum, this is kind of one of the classic spring flowers you think of. Hellebore like cool temps. So they actually start to bloom when it's a little bit colder, and you'll see that they're kind of the first things that are starting to creep out of your garden. And they have just like such an interesting pattern that they grow. So a lot of them will have kind of like a bell shape where they're kind of leaning over. And the color is quite lovely as well. So I'm actually going to cut this guy up into multiple pieces so that I can use him throughout my design. So everyone's pieces are going to look a little bit different, but I am going to kind of cut off one of these large jetting off bits. So I can cut that guy off. And then I'm going to cut my remaining piece into two pieces as well. So just with this one piece of hellebore, I was able to get 3 usable pieces for my design. And then I'm just going to kind of work them into 3 different places, probably one high, one low, and then one somewhere else where I don't already have a hellebore. So my high one, I'm probably going to go over here because I have this big bouncy viburnum on this side. So I'm going to have something that's high over here that's a little bit more light and airy. There we go. So I've got one up top over here. And number 2, I went high, so I'm going to go lower kind of on this side. Again, I'm going to just turn so I can see what I'm doing. Pop this guy in over here, and then probably doing one in the back where I don't have any hellebore yet. Okay. All right, so we saved the best for last. We have 2 phlox left and 1 really pretty shamrock ranunculus. So our phlox is this really pretty little guy. He may only have 1 or 2 buds kind of bloomed out, but these are all going to start to bloom out in your design. So going to be one of those elements that might not look like it has a ton of presence off the bat, but as it starts to bloom out, it's going to be more beautiful to look at. So I'm going to remove probably everything but about maybe 3 or 4 leaves on these stems. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for places where I don't have a lot of white represented. So if you look at my design, there's kind of a big area of green over here where I don't have much white. So those are wonderful places to pop these phlox in. And as they start to kind of bloom out, it's going to be even more white in the design. So I went on this side, and now I'm going to get one on the back side over here. Again, just looking for anywhere where maybe you could use a little bit more light in the design. Maybe it's become more green, and then these are again going to bloom out and be more bountiful in white blooms. All right, so our last and final element is this beautiful ranunculus. In the case of my stem, I have one big ranunculus and then I have a smaller bud that's growing alongside. So I'm just going to break them into 2. And then when it turns, I can kind of see what I'm working with here. I think I kind of want to get this big focal ranunculus, or actually the back of my design is actually pretty boring. If you look at the back, I've got kind of a big stretch of green back here. So I think I might actually put my ranunculus back here just to kind of give it some more interest in the back. So I just kind of pop that guy in. And then I'm going to do my little bud in the front here so that we have them separated and you can kind of enjoy this on both sides of the design. Okay. So yeah, it looks really beautiful. I love in a monochromatic design to do monochromatic being one, kind of working within one color, or working within one segment of the color wheel. So maybe reds and pinks, or all reds, or yellows and greens even could read monochromatic as well. So in these cases, I love to do a clean leaf line. I think it just brings everything together. It looks very modern and just clean and presentable. So I love this design. Whites is one of my favorite color palettes. I just think it's so nice that you can work within one color and then still have so many different textures, so many different shaped flowers. So even though we're really just whites and greens here, there's so much complexity in this arrangement, and there's really a lot to look at and take in. You can see it as one, and then the details are really there as well. So in order to make sure that your arrangement is looking like nice and perky through the rest of the week and beyond, is to give your arrangement clean water. So the nice thing about working in a clear vase is you can kind of monitor as your water line starts to creep down. So these flowers are going to drink the water, and we're going to want to add water back into the vase to keep them nice and hydrated. So I usually use a measuring cup. A turkey baster works great as well. You can also just take your entire arrangement and put it under the kitchen sink and kind of let the water run in through the vase, and then just let it sit for a little while on a towel afterwards to for the vase to dry off. But any of those techniques will work. And depending on how often you water, if you want to do it every other day, you could add a half a cup of water to a cup of water. But you can really see where that water line is. And as it starts to creep down, I would go ahead and add water to your vase. So every day is wonderful. Every other day is just great as well. Every third day would be fine, but you just are going to want to make sure that you are adding water back in. That's going to ensure that you have a really nice long vase life. And then my only other suggestions in terms of care would be to keep it away from direct sunlight. So can definitely be in a room that gets kind of a lot of sunlight. You just wouldn't want it sitting in a kitchen kind of windowsill or somewhere where there's just light pouring onto it. And then we're also going to want to keep it away from drafting heat. So wouldn't want to keep it next to a heat vent that has warm air coming out of it, or maybe on top of your counter, like right above your dishwasher where the surface tends to get warmer. So other than that, I hope you guys have a great place to display this. I think a kitchen island would be beautiful. I think like A kitchen table would be great. You could put it on a table in your foyer. So all kinds of different spaces. I think you could highlight this and make it look really pretty. We hope to see you in class again soon. We do have a class next week. I believe it's the lilac class. Wonderful idea for Mother's Day would be to gift a class to a mom you know. Would be a really fun thing to do with your mom. So if you have any interest in that, you can definitely check out our website. We do have all the information about all of our classes up on the website now. So there's tons of stuff up there, including peonies classes, classes around certain color palettes, classes around holidays. So I think it's a great gift item, and definitely something to keep in mind. And then if it's confusing to you to register multiple people on our website, you absolutely can reach out to us at the shop, and we'll make sure to get you into the class you want to be in, or just give you a gift card that you can gift and then decide at a later date what class you would like to attend. But I hope that you all enjoyed today's class, and we will see you again next week.